information economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. InsideAnalysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. It's careening toward us all the time, but it seems like it's coming faster these days than ever before. I'm not sure exactly why that's true. They told me when I got older, time would go by faster, so maybe that's what's happening. But I could swear this GenAI stuff has just put everything at light speed, certainly for the enterprise, but also for small business, for anyone who has played around with this stuff. It is a leap into the future. And as the futurist William Gibson once said, the future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. And I love that expression because it really speaks to the pockets of innovation that you see around the world and helps you understand that new technologies and new methods do take time to percolate through society, to permeate to various circles in the business world or in the consumer world, for example. And this generative AI stuff affects darn near everything. And it's really opened the eyes of businesses worldwide. I mean, the numbers we're hearing are just off the charts in terms of the number of people using this stuff already. I mean, hundreds of millions of people are using this technology already today, and it's more or less brand spanking new. So it was 2022 that it was released. In general, ChatGPT 3, I believe, or 3.5. We're up to like 4.5 now. Of course, Google has Bard. Now it's called Gemini. Anthropic has Claude. There's Mistral that has the interesting approach they're taking with smaller models. But the bottom line is that GenAI is everywhere. And today we're going to dive in with two awesome experts. We've got Bao-Ha Bui from FPT. It's a Vietnamese company, amazing company. I went to Vietnam last year to check out their headquarters and everything they do and was blown away. Really impressive company. Very hardworking, very diligent, very focused. They get stuff done. They're not worried about the flash and anything silly. They're just focused on getting the work done and building cool technology. So we have Bao-Ha to talk about that. And Jim Wilt as well is a fractional CTO and distinguished engineer. And these folks are really smart. So in studio audience, live studio audience, don't be shy. Ask them the hard questions. I'm going to first just say my take on what GenAI is, and I'll throw it over to Bao-Ha and over to Jim as well. Really, these GenAI engines are predictive engines. That's what they really boil down to. They are predicting either the kind of image they think you want based on your prompt or the kind of text you want based upon your prompt. Now, they were trained on massive amounts of data on the interwebs, not on everything. We learned a couple months ago in one of our first shows of the year that even the folks at OpenAI realized early in the game they can't just train this on any data that's out there. They have to focus on certain data sets to get the end result they want, which is an engine that will reflect back the kind of text that you want. And it's very powerful. Folks, if you haven't used this stuff, you need to start playing around with it. And you first start, then you understand what it does, then you can kind of dig deeper into the weeds to figure out how to use it. But they're basically predictive engines is what they really are when you get right down to it. So with that, Bao-Ha Bui, tell us a bit about yourself and what you see. What is GenAI to you, and what should people use it for?
Yeah, well, thank you, Eric, for that comments that we are not flashy. I want to be flashy, but we techie people just can't be flashy. So it's a skill I have to up myself for.
Right.
But that said, though, so Bao-Ha Bui, I've been in IT and technologies for almost 30 years now, or even more than that. I stopped counting the moment we hit above 20. So been with IT technology. I've been CIOs, I've been VPs, I've been on the application development side, I've been on products, but since 2015, 2010, I got introduced into data management, and the journey starts there. I got passionate about just making informations out of data. How do I get that information into the hand of the users, the executives, the people who's driving trucks, needing to know when I have to deliver a certain product to a certain customers or patients. I was in healthcare for 10 years at that point. So my whole introduction to data was with the HIE. If you still remember those terms, the data for healthcare was a big thing back in 2005, 2010. So that's my introduction to data. Now I've been with FPT, I've been their customers, I've been working with them, and I really appreciate your confirmations that they are hardworking, very smart. As a customer, I was constantly amazed by the level of professionalism that I got from FPT. So not a plug, I'm just kind of recounting my journey here.
Yeah.
What is GenAI? GenAI, like you said, it start out to be, or AI overall, right? It start out to be predictive. You have data, you have the ability to use code to really mine that data and then generate information based on that data or predict based on the patterns that came from that data. And then it get into the ability to really now using pattern to start producing new material. So that's what GenAI is for me. And where are we going with GenAI? It's everywhere. Jim and I talked a lot about GenAI and the growth of GenAI and AI overall. It took 15 years for cloud to be adopted. I still, a few years ago, there was company that still not looking at cloud, but GenAI in 2 years, we got widespread adoptions. I talked to my son. My son is doing a co-op at a pharma company. And I asked him, so what are you doing over your break time? Oh, he's using GenAI to do some optimizations in their lab work, RNA recognitions, RNA pattern. So, it goes from a corporate level to students. How many the professors trying to prevent their student from generating GenAI for papers. But is that not a bad thing, because at the end of the day, it's why reciting information that you can get from Google, just put it in your own words. Is that, so again, it's permeate every aspect of our life nowadays. So we all have to get onto that bandwagon.
That's a great way to put it. I like the way you said that. Where are we going with GenAI? Everywhere. Maybe I'll throw it over to Jim to comment on that. I have to say, I watched the whole big data craze take off 15, 17 years ago, let's say. That was the biggest thing I'd ever seen. This is like 5 to 10 times bigger in terms of the number of people getting in terms of the impact, in terms of the number of people and impacts. It's just off the charts. But what do you think, Jim?
Yeah, it's interesting. You both have really covered a lot of the basics that we wanted to, get out there in terms of the history and where it's come. Bao-Ha's correct. And looking at adoption of the PC was, about 10 years, 15 years to get to 50 million users. It took, about 10 years to 15 years for cloud adoption to really land. And when we look at machine learning and generative AI, machine learning's been around for 10 years plus. It's been around. There are people that have been working in this space for over 20, 30 years with neural networks and so forth. But the big difference with generative AI is it's really applicable to the common person. Anybody can get into a prompt situation, learn some prompt engineering, if you will, and start getting results that are just massively interesting. And I think that, the statistic that hit me that Bao-Ha mentioned is actually it was in 2 months, generative AI has reached 100 million users. That's twice what it took these other technologies, 10, 15 years to achieve. The internet took 5 years to achieve 50 million users. It's already surpassed the internet's adoption in just 2 months. What's also exciting about generative AI is that where traditional AI is using what's traditionally called supervised learning, Bao-Ha mentioned and you did too, Eric, it's mentioned that it's based on a lot more data, and that's called unsupervised learning. What that allows it to do is to create what I'm going to say pattern recognitions and results that are out of our view. So it looks like it's thinking, if you will, on its own, but it's working with such massive data. It's just really, really exciting to see that it can find patterns that we normally wouldn't find ourselves. And I think that's one of the things that makes it that aha moment that, oh, this is different. It's accessible, and it produces results that are pretty transformational because it's putting together patterns that we wouldn't expect to see that are valid.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And maybe, Bao-Ha, I'll throw this one over to you. What I've seen with AI in other capacities too, and now of course with Gen AI, is that almost invariably it surfaces something that I did not expect. And that's very interesting because typically any AI algorithm is just a recipe that is designed to address a particular type of situation, let's say a particular function, a particular array, or something that happens in the world. You're trying to predict what happens or optimize what happens. And you would think that we know ourselves well enough to not be surprised by our own behavior, but that's just not the case. And so every time I use one of these engines, it throws up something I did not expect, and that's good news because it triggers the creative process and it makes us think more. What do you think?
I think I absolutely agree with you. I think that we, as great as our human brains are, we have limited capacity, or how fast we can generate, or how much we can retrieve.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not. I don't think that it's I think it's more of a retrieval, ability. Whereas the machines, it's gonna take everything that it knows and give it back to you, and it reminds you of things that, hey, I knew this, but I didn't remember, and that's where the benefits or the efficiency gains in using generative AI is so great, is because it really takes away the need for us to remember everything that you have to. That's why we're saying the old day, but it's really is still there. You have document template because people cannot remember everything every single time. So you need template to repeat, to save time, so that you don't have to recreate things all the time. Generative AI is able to really do that retrieval of your template and give it all back to you very timely. But retrieval and knowing what to retrieve and when to retrieve is also important, because as much as we like to get everything back, you don't always want everything that Gen AI gives back to you at this moment quite yet.
Well, and that's a comment I had made before our show. I was talking with Mark Palmer, who is a real smart executive in the tech space. And he mentioned that he read some research recently that showed something like 80% of people who are using Gen AI right now are just taking whole hog, whatever comes out of that engine, and using it. That's a very bad idea, right, Bao-Ha? You want to always vet that stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
It will give you good ideas, but you have to be careful because number one, it does hallucinate. So it does make stuff up. It is generative by nature. So it generates new things based upon old things, right? Upon what it's seen. All it's doing is reflecting back patterns of what it's been trained on. But you have to be very careful about vetting that stuff, right, Bao-Ha?
Oh, absolutely. You have to, because it's trained on informations out there, especially some of the open source Gen AI, Open AI, for example. It's being trained on the internet, and not everything on the internet is usable.
That's
So
right.
just be careful.
Not everything is accurate, right? Those memes
No, not
went out.
everything is accurate. And even so that's kind of going into some of the risk that when what we have to do in order for us to be ready for Gen AI is some of those vetting, the training of your resources to make sure they know how to use it safely and effectively.
Yeah, and that's the curation process, right? So we keep hearing about RAG models, retrieval augmented generation, which, if I understand it, really what you're doing is you are trying to use your own trusted governed data as an anchor, and then you want to be able to spin up text using the LLM as a text generative capacity, if you will, but you want it to use your facts that you give it. And those facts are posted as embeddings, either in the model itself, which some people do, or in a vector database, which is then adjacent to the model. And that people understand the whole concept of persisting something in a database and then recalling something from the database. But here we've added a third element, which is the language model to generate stuff. But still the same concept applies, right? We're persisting something in a data store, and then we're leveraging that along with the generative capability of the large language model to create fresh new text that is ideally accurate with what our corporate data says, right, Bao-Ha?
In a way, yes. So, if you're using your data alone and retrieval, and then to supplement it with the large language to make the interactions easier or to generate it's in text, then it's limited. But the ability of GenAI so large language model give you the ability to read the data that in a database just not possible. PDF. Some of the older companies that I have worked with, the banks, insurance company, they have 100 years of documents that's probably still in some kind of fish or images. Large language model nowadays give us that capability to really retrieve that information. And like you said, either embed or vector base it so that now you can retrieve it. So that's the advantage of some of the newer capability. And then based on that, then it gives the ability for us to interact with it using natural language. So that kind of expand the resource pool of who can retrieve that kind of information versus before all the tech people have to write some kind of query.
Right.
Now you have a much larger pool of resource who can prompt for those.
Right. And see, you just hit on one of the biggest transformations that we're seeing right now. And I heard it from my buddy Lou Simon with a company called Optima here in Pittsburgh. He's the one who first said it to me. And this is so big, and we'll talk about this after the break, but this is a seriously big deal. We used to always have to learn how to speak in computer language in order to talk to computers. So we had to learn to speak SQL, the structured query language, to talk to databases. We had to learn Python to talk to various Python apps, or that's used for risk management, lots of different stuff, honestly. You had to learn COBOL in order to talk to a mainframe, for example. Now you can talk in English words to the computer systems. That is a huge deal. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Recordings.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Take us to the future.
All right, folks, take us to the future. Indeed, we're talking about GenAI. It is futuristic. It's amazing, folks. Let's be honest. Play around with this stuff. It's going to blow your mind. A friend of mine turned me on to Midjourney, which is through Discord, I guess. It's a Discord channel. And oh my goodness, it's crazy the amount of artwork and the sophistication of the artwork that you can create with this stuff. It's just wild. So things are changing rapidly. I remember hearing saying whoever wins this war wins the world. Now, again, there are use cases for this stuff. There are dangerous sides of it, deep fakes, things of this nature. We're going to talk about some of that. But this segment, I wanted to get deeper into, are you ready and how do you know? So how do you know if you're ready to leverage this kind of technology? Organizational readiness, as we said. We picked up last segment, we're talking about how you can now talk to computers in English words, in prompts, right? As opposed to having to learn SQL or COBOL or these other languages. And you can also use it to tell you what code does. You can feed it code and say, what does this code do? And it'll tell you. It won't be always completely accurate, but it'll be pretty darn close. And I've heard from enough people now to know that it gets pretty close. It gets to about 80% in terms of coding of writing what you want. And then you just fine tune to get your last 20%. But Jim Wilt, I'll throw it over to you in terms of organizational readiness. Well, I mean, those clever thing I heard in our pre-call last week was to start your first use case internally. So nothing that faces your customers or your prospects or your partners, but do some project that faces just your internal staff to learn about these things, because it's like a new pair of skis or something with jet engines on them. You got to figure out how to ride them. But what do you think about all that, Jim?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting an analogy. It's like skis with jet engines. You wouldn't go out on the slopes
Yeah,
with other people around if you had jet engines on your skis.
right,
I
that's right.
think one of the interesting aspects is there's fear, uncertainty, and deception sometimes in organizations when you're looking at the adoption of generative AI, where we're excited about it and public in general is excited about it. A lot of organizations have what I'm going to say a healthy fear, which is in most situations pretty healthy, right? When it came to PCs or the internet or cloud, it was good to come in it kind of slow. That's not going to work this time because you really are not prepared for the adoption that it has gotten in the general public. And so if you have a policy in your organization not to allow people to use generative AI, be aware they're using generative AI no matter what. It's on their phone. Right. And I know that we want to protect corporate assets, corporate secrets. Fine, that's great. But I think if you go about the adoption we talked about, I think you're going to find you can ease your way into it and get what I'm going to say, a lot of those fears dismantled and a lot of the excitement generated because you're doing it with internal uses, internal purposes. You mentioned about code analysis. I think it's a code companion. Every developer should have, it tied to their hip because it will help them find errors that they're putting in their code so fast. You don't let it write the code for you outright. What you do is it's your companion. It's going to find your blind spots. It's going to find where you made a mistake. I wrote an example of this using multi-threaded code, and I put an error on it on purpose. And it was amazing. Not only could the generative AI find the error, which none of my colleagues could, by the way, it also fixed the error, which all of my colleagues could too, but it fixed it in a very concise and correct way. Now, I'm in charge of the code, therefore I'm the one responsible, accountable. I should never just let it fix the code and put it into production. That's just silliness. But if you do think about it, there's a lot of value that can be used internal to organizations that makes the organization execute much more operationally efficient. And that's something Bao-Ha and I have been doing with other organizations, is coaching them on ways to enhance their internal efficiencies using generative AI. Yes, everybody wants to be the first one out there, and there are some amazing products that are coming out as products from organizations. But if you're new to it, you really need just to kind of fold it inside. One of the retail organizations I highly regard as highly innovative has taken and created a generative AI tool and given it to 50,000 of its employees. And they don't know what they're going to do with it. They just want to learn what they're going to learn from it and what they're going to do from it. And that's a great attitude. You give them a safe tool that's not going to put, if you will, your corporate data in danger, and you see how they're using it. You monitor it. You see how they're using it. And you find out what insights, what blind spots they're finding, what got you moments they're getting, those things you said, oh my gosh, how did it come up with this? Yes, exactly. Everybody should be grabbing that. And I'll kind of pass over to Bao-Ha because I think she can probably talk a little bit to the concept of encouraging operational efficiency in organizations first, in terms of learning what you can do with the tool before you go crazy putting it out there for everybody to see.
Yeah. Well, there's just so many things that we can gain efficiency on, right? So Jim and I been working together on a few of them. One is to leverage AI for sound analysis, to look at what can we do to use sound to detect issues in machines and predictive maintenance, or just assist in the diagnosis of it. Mm-hmm. There's other use where we have products already out there that using visions to detect issues on, say, a wind turbine. If there's a crack, how do you know, so monitoring using Vision AI. We also working on code assist, like Jim was talking about. Every developers nowadays really need to leverage AI, Gen AI, to help them just make, as a developer. Jim was a developer. I don't know, Eric, have you ever worked with any kind of coding? But at the
Yeah.
same time, how tedious it was to sit there and type all of these commands. If there's something that really accelerate that coding for you so that you can focus on the big concept, that's where optimizing the efficiency of every aspect of the organizations will be wonderful. So that's where we are seeing, organization really should adopt. Look at what are the tedious things that nobody really want to do, or they want to do, but they wish it could be faster. That's where we apply AI to help. But how do you get the organizations ready as well, right? What are the things that, let's just say, if you create the tool to set, predict something within your organizations, or to generate some content within the organization. First of all, you need to make sure that your model is trained on information that you want your employees to use, and don't just train it onto the internet, because who knows what's out there. So, organization readiness, making sure that the organizations, the employees are ready and understand what are some safe AI practice should be. And then also from a technology standpoint, setting up the tool that can deliver that safe products. I came from data. Data governance is my preach of the day these days. Every single time, get your data governance in place, get your data cleansed, get your data in a place where your model can get to, so that it can be trained. Because if it takes your data scientists ages to get to the data, it really doesn't get your organization ahead of the game.
That's a really good point that you just made. And so I'm going to throw out a thought here, and maybe I'll throw it over to Jim first and then Bao-Ha. You can ask it, what am I doing wrong? You can ask it all sorts of questions and feed it a document. So one of the, I think, relatively underappreciated and incredibly powerful use cases or functions of these tools is summarization. So you can take a very long document, let's say 1,000-page document, feed it in, and it's almost like a dynamically generated Cliffs Notes. When we were in high school and college, we have these Cliffs Notes, right? It's like, boom.
It dissect for you. It take out all the filler words and it condense it for you. And
that's
it
right.
Get you going so fast. Jim and I were just experimenting, last week? We point a model to some user's document, user guide that we found on the internet, and then feed the engine that we create a bunch of code and tell it to interpret it for us. It did it just like that. Jim got the engine all set up in 15 minutes? 15 minutes to get the first setback. And then, it takes a little bit more training to get to some more legible result, but less than a day.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I was talking to some folks from Matillion, a software company, MDM style company. They had a use case where they said, look, let's just try to throw it at ChatGPT and just see what it says. And some people were skeptical, like, just give it a try. And so they did, and their minds were blown by how accurately it came back. And so the point being, think about the whole side of discovery. When you're doing data analysis, the discovery side is so important because you're trying to find the unknown, right? I mean, it's one thing if you're trying to find a known, like with a query to the database, give me what have already persisted. But if you're trying to look for patterns that have not yet been identified, this kind of technology is incredibly powerful because it will, on a moment's notice, absorb tremendous amounts of data and then throw back seemingly random reflections that are very accurate and very compelling. So on the discovery side, I mean, I kind of view these engines as being a new front end for almost everything in the enterprise eventually. What do you think, Bao-Ha?
I agree. The discovery, that's exactly what Jim and I were trying to figure out last week, is how we have an obscure platform that not that many people know about anymore. And very hard to find resource for. Even if you had resource, some of these platforms that have been in an organization for 15, 20 years, the amount of organic growth and customizations and that governance on these platforms are just mind blown. But how do you really accelerate that discovery process so that you really get the engineers to where they produce result versus doing these tedious, non-value added activities, honestly. So AI, that ability is just, it amazed me still. It get me very excited.
Well, and you do, so the guys from Matillion were mentioning they did then need to go, so they figured something out about how to do it, and then they actually had to go do the hard work with their existing information systems to get the design work and the engineering done.
Oh, absolutely.
But at least they knew which way to go. At least they knew what's possible. Jim, I'll throw it to you. Being able to suss out what is genuinely possible in any given situation is half the battle. Then you have options that you can choose to go in this direction or that direction. But if you haven't effectively discerned the nature of the challenge or the range of possibilities, you're still in the dark and you're shooting in the dark. So this discovery component of these large language models, I think, is very compelling for being able to understand what's happening and then have a really good idea of where to go next. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, it's interesting because the discovery process can be enhanced by asking the generative AI engine, give me 10 questions, ask me 10 questions as I'm going to discover something. And it will prompt you with best practices of discovery to feed itself information so it can start offering you better analysis. The example Bao-Ha was talking about was so much fun because it's an obscure platform that really hasn't been leveraged, let's say, in tens of years. And we were able to find an old syntax manual with 2,000 pages.
Wow.
So doing the PAG approach or grounding or language chaining, you feed that 2,000 page manual in, and now it's making what I'm going to say very precise outputs that are specific to the rules of the language and the syntax of the language that it was, built in. And so you can take things that are ancient in the computer world and make it very modern to the answers it can give with the very accuracies that you're seeing. And it can be 100% accurate 80% of the time. And the times that it's not accurate, you're going to have enough knowledge to call that out, the hallucinations, the biases, the blind spots. However, what we found is that as you're going through a discovery process, it's those gotchas where basically things I wasn't thinking about, it will think, have you thought about, and it'll give you some things, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And it's like, no, actually, I haven't. So it's a companion, right? It's kind of that person that can have a conversation with you and throw things out at you, but you're not going to reject them because you're asking them to do that for you, if you will.
That's a really good way to put it, and we'll talk about this in the next segment coming up here in just a moment, but using it as a companion, like an incredibly knowledgeable intern who will tell you whatever you ask it, may not be right all the time. You kind of reminded me of the old Yogi Berra quote, right? 90% of the game is half mental. Or something like that. It can be completely correct 80% of the time. The clock, the broken clock is correct 2 times a day. So, well, don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to a very cool episode of Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, rocking and rolling today with Bao-Ha Bui from FPT and distinguished engineer and fractional CTO, Jim Wilt. This guy knows a lot and a lot of people, too. He knows a lot of cool people. He knows a lot of stuff, which is always fun. And we want to talk about pitfalls. There are always pitfalls. I think I'll just throw it out there. There are already these anecdotes that get thrown out. It's amazing how fast this stuff happens. Everyone's probably heard about the lawyer who went out and threw citations in that turned out to be nonsense citations. Well, shame on that fool for not just taking the extra step to make sure. And this is where you get into the RAG model concept, right? In other words, you want to use a trusted data source, like whatever sources they have for cases, for historical cases. And I'm telling you, folks, lawyering as an industry is in the crosshairs. Accounting as an industry is in the crosshairs of AI. All these things that we've done traditionally are absolutely positively in the crosshairs of AI. And as Jim was kind of suggesting, 80% of the time it'll be 100% accurate. You do have to know when it's the 20% to take a hard look at stuff. So that's the biggest pitfall, I think, is don't just rush in and start throwing this stuff it generates out into the world. Be careful about what you make that's customer facing. There's several issues already. But those are probably the biggest ones. Jim Wilt, I'll throw it over to you. What are any other major pitfalls you've seen that people should watch out for with Gen AI?
I think one of the things I run into, and you almost have to take a pitfall as comical and enjoy the entertainment aspect of it. When I was writing an article, I was tweaking hyperparameters just to see what happens when you break it, right? And I had a test explain quantum entanglement, and I did it with different temperatures. And I chose one that was out of the parameter range, and it created gibberish. I mean, my 1-year-old granddaughter could have done better, but it was just random characters grouped together. So it wasn't even English language. It wasn't any language at all. It was
Wow.
kind of a thing. So it will break, and part of the learning process, you need to know when it breaks, how to break it, why it breaks, and you need to be on guard for these kinds of things. But as I was finding things, question the answers. That's probably one of the things I would say. In every situation, when it's going to be critical, we talked about adoption in another earlier segment. You want to start with non-mission critical and work your way towards mission critical. You don't start with mission critical. That's the lawyer example you gave and others that are out there in the last week. You don't want that. Start with non-mission critical and work your way with confidence and learning and maturity. I've asked at times when it gives me a quote, can you give me the source of the quote? And it will say, oh, I'm sorry, that I made that up. I mean, literally, that's the words it will use. I'm sorry, I made that quote up. That didn't come from that Forrester Gartner article. Or if it does refer to an article, I'll say, can you give me the enumeration of the article so I can look it up, and it will give me a false number. So you have to drill down into the material before you publicly go somewhere with it. If it's just helping you make a decision, it can be somewhat wrong and you're not going to hurt anybody with it. But if it's anything you're going to be then promoting forward, you have to be accurate about the data and the results. And you can ask it questions. Can you give me the source for that answer? Can you give me references to where I can refer others to learn more about the answer? If it can't do that, you're probably in the hallucination zone and you want to get out of there.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so Jim, you talked about making sure that you check the works, right? And part of the pitfall of adoptions also is moving too fast for the organizations. I think that we really need to watch for, is the organization ready? And if not, doesn't mean that you shouldn't adopt, but you really have to build almost like a safety net and an on-ramp for the organizations to adopt. So meeting your organization, your user where they are, making sure we understand where people are with the ability to use what we're going to put out there, and whether or not we have provided the appropriate level of handholding for this kind of work is very important too.
You're reminding me of something. I'm so glad you brought this up because with this concept of an on-ramp. So you want to be careful at this pace at which you go. You want an on-ramp, and you also want an off-ramp.
Off-ramp.
Right? I think you want an off-ramp. And what I'm referring to is that, and this is going to be an ongoing question, where do you actually insert the generative capability in your workflow? There's going to be some point at which it comes in, and you're going to want to know, of course, where that is. And you're going to want to have a toggle to turn it off or on. So if you use it, for example, for customer service, for chatbots, this is going to be probably one of the most common use cases is fueling a chatbot and feeding it enough information from past conversations to know where to go. That's the beauty of having an existing system, is that you can just take the database of everything your chatbot has already said, do some analysis on when the chatbot did a good job and when the customer was satisfied. Okay, that's the behavior we want to model and mimic. But then at some point, if it starts going wonky, you want to have the off ramp. Oh, turn it off. Like, let's shut it down. It's just like an employee who maybe
Yes.
drank too much before going into work that night, and like, okay, you better go home, buddy. It looks like you've
Well, that
you-
thumb up and thumb down in any chatbot is so important. You really need to be able to collect the information when your chatbot start making no sense. Then
Right.
be able to really train that, because it's a continuous training as well.
Right. Well, that's the thing too. So my buddy Usama Fayyad, who runs the Institute for Experiential AI, I'll throw this over to Jim. He said the whole thing about experiential means human in the loop. And he makes a really good point. And there is this narrative in the media that, oh, AI, it's going to just take over the business and run everything. No, 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 no. You sure don't ever want to do that. You want to have someone watching it all the time to make sure that it does what you want it to do, because it will move at blinding speeds. And so if you don't course correct in time, it's going to move at blinding speeds when careen off the tracks, right, Jim?
Yeah, I think the chatbot example is a good segue into what I'm going to say augmenting. I'm going to say services. And everything that's augmented means it's a human that's in that loop. They have the accountability and the responsibility to have the final say. So maybe what we'll see, I would love to see in the future, is opposed to just chatbots doing it randomly and anonymously, that it connects you directly to a person with information that's augmented by the conversation. So the person on the other end can understand your situation much faster, and then through the generative AI, get you to your resolution much faster. But that human is going to, if you will, facilitate that process, or in the sense that it's not completely blind.
Yeah.
But you brought up a good point too. There's an article I wrote where I started it with the tractor didn't replace the farmer. And generative AI won't replace your job, right? However, I end the article with the tractor didn't replace the farmer, but farmers with tractors did replace those without. And I think that's a big distinction to what you said, Eric, because it's very specific. The human in the loop is a necessity. The power of the human in the loop, if you will, in terms of accuracy and impact, is going to increase astronomically.
Right.
And that's going to now create what I'm going to say, what Bao-Ha was saying earlier. Am I going to ban papers from being written by generative AI, or am I going to allow it to augment people who are writing papers? Different question, but that's kind of the thing you have to get through.
Well, Jim was a teacher. I have never been a teacher, so I'm advocating for allow GenAI to write paper.
I think for augmenting, and I think one of the cool things
that's
is
good.
that
Augmenting.
Yeah, you've got. I wrote something. Read this and tell me what I wrote. Okay. Okay, that is not what I was trying to say. All right. Correct it for me a little bit. Let it correct it, and I can say, okay, that's good. Now I understand where I made a mistake. Now I'm going to continue writing from that, not take it. I'm going to take what it corrected and make it my voice and my intention, and then have it read it back to me again. So it's a give and take when you think about it.
Right.
Well, it's go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, you brought up such a great use case, and I'll give an example of why, and then we've got a podcast bonus segment coming up here next. But think about in customer service, and this is what really fascinates me about these engines, is how it decides to choose what it chooses, right? And that's why you have to try it to learn and to kind of figure it out, because there is a method to the madness. Obviously, it's a computer system, right? I mean, it's got rules and instructions and things it's supposed to do. But you think about customer service, and historically, you have a customer service center. It's going to bringing up your system, bringing up your record, et cetera. It's a very slow process. And it's typically from one system, where there are lots of other systems where customers have touched the organization, touch points, as they call them, on the call center, on the website, in a store. Maybe I wrote a letter or something, you never know. But these Gen AI engines can, in a moment, like as you're getting to the customer service rep, whip up a whole bunch of stuff that's accurate and relevant, and just give suggestions to the call center person. So now it's not this slow, painful thing. It's going real fast, and the human can decide what to use and what not to use. That's why it's so powerful, folks. Podcast bonus second coming up next. You're listening to Inside Analysis.